You're listening to All Things 3D, where we talk about the world of fabricating, designing, and capturing in the third dimension.
Hey, I never saw you coming in. Just turn your head to the right and give me a nice view of the side of your head. All the way to the right. Look at those students over there.
But you cannot see my face. Do you see me?
Morning, everybody. Hi, this is Mike Balzer.
You need to provoke a little.
And what you saw behind me there was the, what was it? The little trailer for a new product for obviously, or hopefully it won't be for the Samsung Gear VR only, but that is Meet Rembrandt, which is kind of a cool little app that you can download. I believe it's free right now, but essentially I played that in order to identify the theme of our show, which is the VR time machine. And will VR now give us the opportunity to feel like we are part of an environment that obviously we never existed before in? And that was a fine example of it. If you remember, I've created something called Inside Van Gogh, along with the 3D creator Ruslan, that allowed you to walk around in one of his paintings. So clearly there's a direction here. On Daydream, there's an app that allows you to step inside paintings. So clearly somebody is looking at it from an artistic standpoint. But imagine being able to go into factories, historical events, let's say standing in the middle of a Coliseum. And sure, there have been some out there from like the History Channel and so forth, but I feel that they're somewhat cheesy. But this one looks like it's well made. Let's kind of jump right into the article that I found this, which was on Engadget by Maria Moon. And yeah, she goes through and writes about this obviously fantastical place, the Dutch master. And as you saw there, it had some nice little clips. And then there's another one called Vincent van Gogh's experience called The Night Cafe. I don't know if you've seen that one before, but it kind of takes you through an interactive view of you going through not necessarily all of his paintings, but essentially different scenes from it, which was well done. We kind of talked about it a long time ago, about 2 years ago, when it was first starting to be introduced for the Gear VR. And then obviously, as I mentioned, what I had been working on. So we're probably going to see more and more of this. And obviously, as we scale up using either Microsoft's mixed reality, the Oculus 5 or HTC, and who else, or excuse me, and whatever else becomes available in the future, this will clearly be scaled up to provide even better imagery, more interactivity. Imagine be able to work with things from the past that we have not been able to do. So I see this as being a great tool. And obviously some people have already scaled these up for the dinosaurs, either one as skeletons or fossils, or skinning them and making them seem lifelike. So imagine being able to do that. So back when I was a kid, which was many, many decades ago, the ability to see dinosaurs, or either you had these little plastic models that you could touch and feel, or you saw them in books. And then obviously videos came out that allowed you to see them on TV. And to me, this is the next step, to be able to actually be part of the environment as they're actually interacting. And clearly, I think this is a great direction, and literally allows us to step back in time to be able to see this. And being a VR time machine, at least the version that we've created. It allows us to move forward to fanciful interpretations of what our future is. So I really think there's a lot of work that can be done in these areas. Okay, so let's move on to our next item. Kind of not really a point from the past, but I guess it is sort of, since I talked about it the last couple of weeks. So there's a product that just was announced. If you're not aware of it, it is the iPhone X. And the iPhone X has some very interesting technology. So let's take a look at it. As you can see behind me, the biggest pluses behind it, and I've talked about it before, is its OLED screen. Also, the fact is, not only is it a 5.8 screen, it has the ability, what's the resolution if I remember? Let's see if it tells us in the text specs. I want to say, it was kind of odd, yeah, 2436 by 1125. And I'm probably assuming this was just scaled up in order to match previous phones, but it's a not necessarily a far cry. It's very close to a 2560 by 1440, but even with the newer Samsungs, which I think are what, 28, so it's even less than the newer Samsung phones. But more importantly, this is a big jump from the 1920 to 2436, also AMOLED. So this would make it a great little device for VR. So even though Apple did not announce anything from a VR perspective, I know that other companies like Occipital, that we've talked about many times before, are working on something in this area. They obviously work with the iPhone 6 and iPhone 7 because of its smaller size. Now that this phone is almost the same size as either the 6 or 7, but a higher resolution and wider screen, this should allow their headset, they'll probably have to redo the door for it to work, but this will allow their headset with their sensor to be able to work with. Also, I've talked about the Mirror Prism as another great product for this, because you can slide it in, and because the OLED is a brighter screen, let's see if they identify the, yeah, 625. So that's a fairly bright, and obviously you could push that up, and when it's reflected off that semi-mirrored finish of the Mirror Prism, that will allow this to be viewed, or the objects to be viewed as though they're in front of you, with a much brighter appearance and, more importantly, a better resolution. Now, the other thing, and this is why I'm bringing this up, let's see if they talk about it in this. Not really, but we talked about last week. If you saw, and I've got a little video clip, and I'll go ahead and run to the area of it. Let's see where it's at. There we go. So if you remember seeing this, here we go. So I'll go ahead and play it.
Face ID learns your face.
This was from the Apple event
Even
the
if
other
you
day.
change your hairstyle,
Turn that down.
decide to put on glasses, you're wearing a hat,
So,
you do
as
it up
mentioned,
any way you
this
do it,
show has
Face ID learns
the
your
this new scanner. If you can see it here, essentially it's on the right. They call it a dot projector. Essentially, it is a structured light infrared system, very similar to the Occipital structure sensor, which ironically was the same company that they licensed from, which was PrimeSense, as well as the Microsoft Kinect, which was also licensed for PrimeSense. So they call it a dot because it projects dots, but it calibrates it according to the camera. There's an infrared camera in there as well. And what it does is it's able to, by using, let's say, a flat surface, determined by the dot positioning, the deformation. And that deformation is what allows it to determine, obviously, depth. And the fact is that it's tuned to be maybe a foot, 2 foot. I can't remember. I think that's about 300. And if you remember, I created a lens system that is capable of being brought up to 300 millimeters. So this is a finely tuned system. The sad thing is, because it's only tuned for that, that becomes a problem, because you can't, in my opinion, use it for anything else. So it'll be very good for close-up, doing, as you saw there, facial capture as well as facial motion capture. Also, the other thing that they talked about is this thing from a security perspective of not being able to be fooled. And there's a couple of theories out there. My theory is not only is it projecting this dot pattern, but when it takes the information back, there's some people are saying that you can look at that infrared illumination, which it is not. It's just an infrared camera. It's not illuminating your face with it, but they can determine the absorption. And I think it's a little bit more complicated than that. I think it also has to do with the differential of time based upon your movement. Obviously, you blink and you do have facial tics and gestures that can be compared. So obviously a mask will never move unless you move the whole thing, and you can obviously do offset displacement from that perspective as well to determine that it's a mask. So it's the fine details that this thing is looking at. And the fact is that it can capture facial motion. I think that also plays a role in here. And this has all been recorded, and that's how it's not be able to fool by a static facial mask as what they showed there. Now, obviously, nobody knows exactly, but that's my theory. It doesn't have to do with the fact that they're bathing you with infrared light and then determining, or the infrared camera is able to determine your thermal signature because you radiate. No, I think personally it is more to do with a dynamic differential between different moments in time. There obviously is going to be some differences in your facial movement, and I think that's recorded. It also helps with some of the other disparities. But why is this different? The fact is, and some people have said, well, we've been doing this for some time. Well, we haven't combined it all. We've had 2D visual capture and then analysis, but now we have not only the 2D component, but we also have the 3D component. But the SAD, it is fine-tuned specifically at probably a certain distance, and since it is not I'm assuming it's not a variable focus lens, it probably will not work as well as the structure sensor or any other structured light system to scan larger areas. So it's limited to this. And I made the point in a previous show that, well, that will be great. Again, with the mirror prism, you could just project it out and then be able to track objects using this particular structured sensor scanning system, but that probably will not happen because this particular product is limited in its focus length. So sadly, and not sadly, good for occipital, they still have a product that can be continued to be used. My biggest gripe is its weight, but they do have their core version, which has double the infrared cameras, one projector, two infrared cameras to provide much better performance from a tracking perspective and also from a scanning perspective. So that should be something that'll be available soon. And I believe there is a couple of larger manufacturers who are looking into using it for a product coming out in the future. Don't know for sure, but that's basically the story about it. So I'm a little disappointed that the camera in this system, the 3D camera system in it, is minimized to probably about a foot and a half in distance. And there's a sweet spot more than likely. And if you go outside of that, that's something to try if somebody ever gets one of these. Put it out to like 3 feet and see what happens with it. I have a feeling that it will not capture. It's going to be a sweet spot, as I have found with my own, as I called it, my 4 eyes lens system for the occipital structure sensor. This is what I had found in the past, is that you have kind of a sweet spot. You go outside of that range and you start to lose tracking. So, but they may have refined it. Who knows? So sadly, it might be a great little facial tracking system that'll hopefully be able to record these points and then bring it into other applications. If they just leave it to something that can be done within the phone itself, for instance, Snapchat or whatever the product that they were using it with. I think that's sadly a misuse of some high technology, but that wouldn't be the first time that Apple has done that, correct? Oh well. So let's move on. Okay, so let's see what else I was going to bring up. Oh, kind of a blast from the past. I thought this was just kind of funny. The fact is that this guy took the time and effort to put an LCD panel inside of probably a Chinese VR headset, and then hooked it up to his Commodore 64, because, you know, we all want pixelated VR experiences. And so I thought that was a little funny. There's a little video that you can go out there and play, but I thought that was amusing. Okay, so our first news item, let's kind of look at this. I thought this was kind of cool. If you are into mechanical design or even standard design, I can't think of the word right, but a lot of times what I have found is that you'll create a product. Now I'll take a step back. There is, if you own SolidWorks, there's obviously this type of simulation that goes in there. Obviously Fusion 360 has some tools, but what makes this or sets this one differently is the fact that not only can you bring in, let's say, an STL file, it will stress it dynamically almost in real time so that you can actually see that. So I've got a few videos to show that'll do a better job than me. Make sure I line these up correctly. Where's the videos at? Yeah, I've lost it. All right, let's start with this one. Here we go.
What if you could make a simple or complex change directly on a 3D model and instantly know the impact of that change? With Discovery Live, fluids results instantly adjust as any geometry changes. Structural simulations recompute to instantly show the changes in stress and deflection because of your iteration. Discovery Live lets you not only digitize your ideas as you have them, but the interactive geometry gives you invaluable feedback in how your design will perform.
And here's another little video.
Discovery Live is not only equipped with powerful rendering capabilities, but they're interactive. The unique render types, interactive range settings, and dynamic numerical feedback propel you to discover insights into your product's performance. Changing the size of a bounding box or the characteristics of streamlines are just a few options to help you find trends in your designs. The dynamic controls of Discovery Live let you see only what you want and how you want it.
And finally,
what does the speed of Discovery Live mean for you? It means finding design performance.
So this shows you
and experimentation on the most complex models is free and instant. It means no problems with model integrity or things like meshing, as you see immediate insight and trends into your design. It means having an interactive simulation experience where you test your ideas in real time. Discovery Live provides the insight you need at the speed you demand.
But wow, pretty neat. Okay, so back to it. Yeah, you can sign up for it. I was going to download it, but you have to provide them some information, and then they send you I wouldn't say a key, but some type of link back so that you can download it. And I didn't want to spend the time doing that right now, so maybe I'll give a follow-up after I try it next week. But imagine, you know, if you don't have some sophisticated software now, again, I have no idea what the cost will be. Right now it's free to try out and provide them beta information. So more than likely, this is going to be a fairly pricey application, but you have similar tools other than the real-time capability in SolidWorks. I think Onshape has some tools, and I also believe that Fusion 360, but more than likely I know that within Fusion 360 it is static, so it's kind of cool to be able to make some changes and see how it actually looks while it's working in real time. As you can see here, showing the stress points are very important, and a lot of times you create a prototype and you find out you have a weak spot. Now keep in mind, at least from my experience, it all depends on the materials used as well. So you have to know something about the materials you're working with. I have found that using FDM, let's say even with ABS, nylon, or let's say PLA, they all have different strengths and flexing. So you need to know all this when you're designing your product. And I don't know if that will take that into account. Like I said, I'll spend some more time with it. I have a feeling it will. The other thing is thermal conduction. Imagine if somebody was designing a budget VR backpack and wanted to test cooling in the system. Well, that's possible. And you just basically design your model of it, and then you can run flow through it, set up heat points, and determine how well it dissipates that through the airflow. So obviously a lot of great opportunities here, and here they actually talk about this with being a CPU design. Then also airflow, if you're designing a mechanical thing that needs to go through the air, like a vehicle or an airplane or some other thing. They showed an example in the video of a large truck and venting the air over the top. So obviously some great opportunities there. I thought it was cool. I will be trying it out over the course of probably the next week or the week after, depending on how far I get along with my, as I call it, arkIT. Oh, well, let's move on to the next item. Let's see. Okay, so there's the ants. Yeah, so this was an article in TCT. This is the actual website, ancest.com, and there's the 4 videos. We showed 3 of them. All right, so let's move on to Forbes, and this is our 3D in medicine. How 3D printing is it helping cancer? Now, if you've been following the show for some time, most of these should not be a surprise to you. But I thought it was interesting, this first one here, the right amount of radiopharmaceuticals, because they can actually create a 3D mold that can be filled with liquid, allowing experts to see the detail of the radiopharmaceutical. So they literally can show the cavities and how it will actually get to a particular location. So I thought that was kind of cool. Now, obviously, what they don't point out here is that MRIs and CTs can all show, especially some of the more dynamic CT machines that can show it in real time. So they could put a radioisotope and watch its flow and obviously take measurements. Now, it all depends on the individual, but they can determine a lot of data in particular areas. So that's another area we've already talked about, creating duplicates for reconstructive surgery. That has been, we've kind of showed it many times, and I've actually kind of worked with it. Chris has actually created bones that could be used by a veterinarian to structure the pins and so forth. So that's another opportunity. And then the first one here, which I kind of went right by, is just using it. No, let's see. Did I miss one? Thought it said, okay, so there's only 2. So obviously there's one more, and that is to create an area of the body and use that. Let's say if you have to actually provide surgery to remove the cancerous tissue, you can basically test it and refine your process. So that I would add to that as well. And we're seeing that a lot being used more and more. In fact, as I see more and more hospitals and being mentioned in these articles is great. So I'm glad that they're seeing a lot of advancements and, more importantly, its use, and more, which I would assume means it's being approved. So good for that. Okay, let's move on to the next item. And this is 3D scanning, or as I call it, Scanner Darkly. This is an article by Engadget. Another one by Marielle Moon. She's all over the place. But this is the new Sony phone. A lot of people are complaining that it's still outdated. As I said, the big, what do they call it, chin in the upper area, with the new iPhone coming out. Now, funny is that the iPhone X is the only one that has no chin, but Samsung's phones for the last couple of years, actually, I think only in this last year, has I think there's still a little bit of a chin, very little on top. So we're seeing advances from that perspective. But what makes this phone unique is the fact that it has a 3D scanner built into it. Now, what was not known, and I was still looking it up, and there's something very interesting, and I'm going to go to their website right now, that I thought made this very interesting. One, they talk about the camera, but that's not what we're going to look at. And I have a little video I'll play in a second too. Where was it at? I was hoping, yeah, okay. Yeah, they had a picture on the back. Okay, well, let's see if we can zoom in on it. Well, it's not showing it. Oh, that's the compact, so I apologize. Let's go back to, let's see if it shows it here. Well, that's bad. Okay, so there was an image that showed the back of the phone. I think it's over here. And they have a little end to it. And that reminds me, and I can't think of the company now, but they're using, I don't think this is their own proprietary scanning module. They're using another company's technology, and I just can't remember where I've seen that end before. And it doesn't appear that they're identifying it. But while I'm doing that, I'll go ahead and play the video. Like many videos, it's kind of cornballish. So here we go. And I'll kind of jump. But what I didn't see, and I guess I could go back through it, is who makes the scanner and why would you have a scanner built in it with some deficiencies like in the screen, so you wouldn't be able to use this for Daydream. The fact is that it does have, make sure now before let's see what it says. Screen. Yep. So it is not a OLED screen. As you know, Daydream specifications require an OLED screen. But so you have, I guess it's going to be one of the few phones with Google Oreo on it, but no capability of using Daydream. It does, I believe, have a Snapdragon 835. So it's going to be a fairly fast performing machine. It's got 4 gig of RAM. So it's a nice phone, and I don't personally have a problem with what it looks like. Here it is. So look on the back of it. See that little end there? That is something that I have seen before, and it doesn't stand out right now. So they're using a sensor system that is, I've seen it in something else that allows them to do their 3D scanning. So it looks like a really nice phone. The fact is that you wouldn't be able to use it for Daydream, I guess, is kind of a problem. Also, there's another phone out there called the Asus Zenfone AR that can also, because of its Tango incorporation, do 3D scanning, but you need something like Scandy, which I've talked to before. It's available. I don't know what the cost is. It's an app that you can download for it. The sad thing is it's like they don't ever get everything all in one package. The specs on the Zenfone are really nice. It's a 5.7 screen, 2560 by 1440 OLED. But sadly, it's still using a Snapdragon 821, which is not a bad performing. That's what I've got on my Pixel XL. But it was released at the time that we now are seeing, in fact, right after the Samsung phones with the Snapdragon 835, which definitely has better performance. So it's not like they can't get everything in one basket. But it does do 3D scanning, and let's see if they have some, let's see. Trying to see if we can find some. So the scanning is, it's similar to earlier versions of the occipital software. So it's not bad, but would you go out and buy a Zenfone specifically for this? I would hold off. Would you go out and buy the Sony for its 3D scanning? I think it's going to be about $500, $600. I'd probably hold off. So it's kind of like they can't seem to get everything together in one package. And even as we just talked about the iPhone, which 10, which is going to be an extremely expensive phone, and I'll jump back to that. I think it's like $999 just to keep it below that, but that's only with 64 gigs. And then it jumps right up to 256. I think it's going to be what, $1299 if I remember correctly. the scanner built into that's going to have, in my opinion, a limited range. We'll see. So you got all these products. In fact, it's front facing, so it'd be difficult to scan something on the other back facing when the scanner is on the front facing with the display. Now, I thought of creating like a periscope mirrored system that allows you to do that. But again, if the range is limited, it's not going to do very good. But maybe close-up faces outside of your own, who knows? But it's $12.99, about $600 for the Sony, and then I think you can get the Zenfone for about anywhere between $399, $499 to $600, depending on memory, and you can get that on Amazon. And I have a feeling that'll probably come down because it's not as popular as they were hoping. So that's about the 3 different phones. Or if you're going to stick with the iPhone or iPads, don't forget the structure sensors out there. But that sells for about $350. So keep that in mind. That's going to push your cost up unless you go at the low end. Now, I have gotten to work with the iPad, or not iPad, the iPod 6G, but that's already a lower grade processor that will not work with ARKit. So that kind of rules that out. But if you just need a scanner, you can go on a budget with the structure sensor. There is also the RealSense, but I don't know if they're continuing to work with it. I do know they have it working on Windows because I have a tablet. Was it who makes it? The HP. I can't think of the rest of the name, but the HP has the RealSense built into it. And then there's a couple of other tablets that have that built into it. And then you can get the module separately. And I do believe they said that they were going to have an Android kit. And then obviously there was a phone by Intel that was Tango compatible using their RealSense. So there is some software out there. So you could convert an Android. And then I think there's a couple of other companies trying to create Android type scanners outside of phones. So you could probably get an attachment to your existing, but I haven't seen that many yet. And I've kind of asked Occipital if they're going to move into that area. I can't tell you right now if they are or not, but we'll see. Might be a possibility. All right, let's move on into our VR section, or as I like to call it, VR corner in a round room. First item here is, I guess there's news from Road to VR. There's a couple of other places that they identified it that allows you to, that they've registered Vive Focus as the name for their standalone VR headset. And this is built on the, what do they call it? And Worldview or something like that, which is their version, I think, of the RGB camera inside out tracking system. They say that there will not be handsets like the version that's coming with the mixed reality set. I don't know what else is in it. Supposedly this is based on the reference design by Qualcomm. If you remember, my eyes widened at the price they wanted, which I think was like $1,500 for their reference developer kit, which I declined. Wasn't going to pay that much for a mobile system. So I have a feeling this is not going to be less than $500. More than likely, it's going to be around $600 to $800. Being enclosed like this with the ability to do inside out tracking is going to be cool, but why didn't they just provide a module for the existing phones or a headset, like somebody creating something called the, I don't know, what is it called? yyou Play that allows you to put your phone in it. So something like that would be cool. Since I've already done it for the structure sensor, I think that would be cool. But the fact is they're not moving in that direction. Kind of disappoints me. So what do they call it? Gee, I'm following up, but I have a little video. It's kind of a world sense. That's it. So let's play the little video. What I found interesting, though, is that you notice she didn't really move around that much. She moved side to side. So I'm wondering if it has limited range. If that would be the case, then it's not clearly the same as what the mixed reality system is. Some people have tried it and they did feel that they could move around. So maybe the video there just didn't it was obviously an example of playing dodgeball, and maybe they didn't want to look at anything further than that. So that should be coming out, I think, around the holidays. Keep in mind, on October 4th, I wasn't really going to bring it up since it's 3 weeks out or 2.5 weeks out. Google will be announcing their new Pixel XL2. I'm looking forward to that. I really enjoyed my Pixel XL. So I'm looking forward to that. Supposedly it's going to be made by LG. So if it's anything like the larger LG phone, which I held off on, because if this is true, then you're going to get the Google experience with a nice large LG screen, which will be great for VR. I've always felt the 5.5 was a little too small. 5.7 to 6 inches is, I think, the perfect size for VR. So we'll see. And again, though, let me stay on my point. So they're also going to be talking about this device as well. So we'll see more of this at their announcement, which I think is, what did I say, 4th or 5th of October, but we'll cover it more later on. So looking forward to that. Again, if the pricing is high, we only have so much money, or at least I do. And you've got this coming out. You have the mixed reality headset, which I did buy the developer set, which I think is really cool, low cost, and you don't need a lot of PC performance in order to get some good results with it. And as you know, I'm going to be talking later on my budget VRBkPAK and how to make one yourself. I'm pretty much done with it, so I'm at a point now that I can identify what I think would be the best way to make it, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. And then you have all these phones that can be Daydream compatible, and then there are adjunct technologies that I've discussed in the past that you can put on the front of these devices to be able to do inside-out tracking. But I found the mixed reality headset by Microsoft to be the best from a perspective of not being limited on your space, as long as you have conducive tracking systems. And what that means, you have to have some disparity and patterns either in your floor and your walls or objects. If they're flat, like I found out, being in a large parking lot, that didn't seem to work very well. You have to have objects so that it can, what do you want to call it, anchor to and be able to determine depth information. But I found that the experience was very nice and look forward to seeing other things with it. Just developing for it wasn't that difficult, no more so than any of the other systems out there. You have to jump through a couple of hoops, but if they are going to be Steam compatible, which is the rumor, may not be actually available at the time they release these. That will be a big plus, because then you don't have to jump through the hoops of the Windows, what do they call it? I can't remember the name of it. The Windows platform process. You could just go directly into Steam, but there may be some other hooks in there. Don't know yet. But the fact is that you would be able to get your apps all in one place on Steam, I think, is a pretty good idea. And hats off to them for moving in that direction. All right, so let's move on to where are we at? Oh, I guess we're at the point I can give you my little demo, sneak peek. I'm not going to show you much because I'm going to make the app free. And I don't want, because it's kind of a scare app. So I don't want to, let me bring this up. There we go. I don't want to frighten you too early. And plus, I don't want to release some of the surprises, but I think you'll enjoy it. It'll also be a Daydream app, and I think you'll enjoy that too. So if you've got a Daydream compatible phone, and there are more coming out, that will be fun. And I want to suggest I'd make it for cardboard, but I'm kind of pushing the envelope. I'm trying to make some of the lighting and objects seem very realistic. I think that's very important from an AR perspective. And I call it AR, but it's reality, kind of AR mixed reality, because you're anchoring in the real world and just putting 3D objects. AR can be anything that's superimposed on your screen or in front of your eyes. So in fact, it could also be audio. All right, so let's kind of find my app here. Where's it at? Whoops. Here we go. Oh, I guess I should bring it up, huh? There we go. So if you can hear the nice creepy audio. Okay, well, that's it. I'm not going to show you a little bit more, but I will bring up, let's see, just kind of spins right now. So let me go back to my main screen. So I fudged a little bit. This is not the arkIT version. This is the core version. I find personally that the performance is a little better on it. But let me bring up my screen if it's still here. I fell asleep. And I'll give you a sneak peek behind the Unity version that I'm working on. And there you go. Again, I'm going to try and limit, but if you have prowling eyes, you probably notice some of the naming in my hierarchy here that shows. But so one of the things that was very important is to create a realistic balloon. If you're familiar with Unity, I think it's a pretty great engine. I don't think it looks as good as Unreal, but it's nice to prototype in and actually create some good results. One thing that I really like about it is plugins are very easy to put into this. So that's why I found that designing it is a little more straightforward. What I found with Unreal is if you need to work with something new, let's say a new beta, you have to literally compile it yourself, which takes 3 to 4 hours, and then run it in that particular version. And that seems to be the case with mixed reality, the Core AR, the AR kit from Apple. They all needed their own separate versions. Whereas as long as you have, let's say, a beta version of Unity, you can bring in plugins and it all seems to work. I just found it a little bit more straightforward. Also, I've been using it for several years now, so I'm comfortable with it. So I found that the system works pretty good. I also like the fact is that you can bring in basically almost any asset from any type of from sound files, OGG files, WAV files, MP3. And it just seems to be able to handle a lot of different file schemes. So if you really want to get something up and running quickly, and for those of you who are out there who are watching, who are familiar with this, I'll stop talking now. So the important thing was to create a balloon that looked like a balloon. So I needed to design it in such a way that I could apply a texture and some other functions that create a little bit of transparency and add a little specular to it so that it kind of has the sheen of a balloon. But more importantly, I wanted it to move like a balloon. So I gave it, what do you call it now? Actually, I'll bring it up here. Here's my balloon. So I wanted to give it a collider because that's important because we don't know when it collides with something. And also I wanted to give it, do I not have it on this? Where did I put it on the main one? I wanted to give it a rigid body, and that's important because if you want to apply natural forces to it, so it makes it look realistic, I use that. I also wanted it to have a force that seemed to accelerate it. So I created a little routine that when I applied the force, I scaled it so that it accelerated the balloon movement towards you. As you notice, it was slow coming in and then it rapidly got faster as it came up to you. And then I didn't want it to just stop. So I then just basically put a drag on it that was super long or large so that it literally was like hitting a wall. And that drag allowed it from skirting off to the side so that it just seemed like it just stopped and floated there. And then one thing that I don't like about Unity is that it doesn't really, well, I shouldn't say that, maybe it's just my inexperience, but once I wanted to tag the balloon to do something, like maybe bring in some new objects to scare the hell out of you, who knows. That also triggers audio because I think audio is very important for people to jump. So you have to make sure these are all timed properly. And I found that that was a problem and they don't really handle it gracefully. So sometimes I had to resort to Shutter, creating some, as they call them, no-op loops, essentially do nothing for a period of time. When I could use it, I waited to the animations finish or I waited to the sound finish. But I found that that was a little flaky at times. So when I could use it, I did. When I wanted to fine tune it, I just created a little no-op routine so that it just kind of delayed it a little bit. So everything just linked up. Sad thing is, this has all been working on a nice PC. I'm then going to have to push it to a phone and see if it all still syncs up properly. But I really liked it. And then I think you're going to really enjoy it when I finally release it next week or two. It's going to have obviously some little tidbits of the movie It, if you haven't seen it already, that I think you'll enjoy. And I tried to stay away from any trademark things. So if you are wanting the exact duplicates of the movie It, you're not going to find them here, but I think it will still scare you pretty well. And like I said, I'll create a daydream version with a stark black background. Everything is just black. And to me seemed kind of very eerie and surreal, and all these objects moving in it, I think will also creep you out. Okay, so that's about it for my take on the sneak peek of, as I call it, arkIT and coreIT. And then we'll move on and talk about the other thing that I've been working on. And I thought it was pretty cool that I finally found a case, and I've been looking for several months now. And I'm going to go ahead and show it to you now. And here it is. It's a little bigger than the one that I've been working on, but more importantly, it now contains everything inside of it. And I was able to use the top of it to actually mount, as remember, I talked about using Anton Bauer batteries. You can also go with the Sony V-Lock. This is only an 80 watts per hour, but they make a, God, I think all the way up to a 300. Obviously, the size will change with that. And they can be more expensive. But I found one about $120 that supports 160 watts per hour V-Lock. But I had some of these from my days of working with a Panasonic camera, so I put them to use. And this is like a $6 little chassis piece here. And it allows you to lock the battery in place. And then there are two leads that'll run down in the case. I drilled a hole into it. And they'll go to this nice little, and we're going to talk about this power supply. This was the key thing, besides getting a case that could basically include it all. So I mounted the power supply in there, and this is a unique power supply normally made for cars, but I wanted something that didn't require a rigid 12 volts. I wanted to be able to work between, down to 10 volts all the way up to 16. These batteries here are about 13.9. So it didn't work with my previous iteration. Because of that, I had to use basically a precise 12 volt system. This does. Now, it only has a 20-pin ATX connector. So if you want to work with this with a 24, I do have a cable, and I will provide the links, which I'll get to in a minute. But I'm going to try with the 20 first, see if it will support the MSI board with the PCI card. Normally, those 4 pins are used to provide more amperage to the PCI bus. So we'll see if I need it or not. And then the other cool thing about this case, one, it is a plexiglass ABS basically frame with a plexiglass support structure in it. And it's kind of clear, so I'm going to add some LEDs. And then if you remember watching the show earlier, I created a lucite piece of plastic with some foam and a backpack frame, so literally you can just wear it. And this has a abdomen strap on it to keep it secure. And then you pack it in with the battery, and then you just plug all your items in there. To work with the HTC Vive, which requires its little power supply, I will add another connector here so that you can plug in that particular adapter directly into this, so that you won't have to require another little AC adapter. I'm debating if I want to run it off the battery directly through a 5-volt USB type device, or if I want to run it off this. This board is capable of 160 watts, so we'll see if that'll actually supply it. A version that I've been using this battery for with my little Nook Mini with the mixed reality headset, which also runs off the USB 3 port, had no problems working with the power supply built into that. I got about an hour and a half, about 2 hours worth. I don't think I'll get more than 45 minutes to an hour with the 80. So I would recommend getting a larger battery. And even though this is an Anton Bauer clip, you can get a V-Lock almost the same dimensions. So we'll be able to mount directly on the top of the case, and then you mount it. Now the battery are hefty, and this is a lot of the weight. So the fact is that it has a plastic case, and that really helps to keep the weight down. In fact, the loose side backing and backpack frames are almost heavier than the case itself. Kind of a nice design. It's kind of plain squarish, but the great thing is you can buy this for about $39. Now the US store I think sells it for $49, but that's about the same price of the other case that I was working with that was actually heavier. So it will mount everything. There's actually some more space. I will get a small thin fan here, but keep in mind, you don't want to drive too much stuff with it because it's all going to be battery operated, and anything that you add to this is going to take away from the time. I also went with a thinner fan, but you could actually go with a larger fan if you needed to. You have the space for it. One of the things that I recommended is since I think they laser cut all the components, is to cut some ventilation directly above the fan for the microprocessor or CPU fan, so that way it'll suck it in directly. Right now it's sucking in from the sides. And the fact is, on this case here, the GPU blocks the side fan slot. You're not going to get a lot of clearance from that perspective. So that's what I recommended to him. I also had a few other things that could be done to this. But yeah, really excited about it. So let's jump to my list here on Amazon. So I have two different points, depending. Let me actually get to that. Here we go. So one of the items that you can work with is the Intel Core i5-6400. Now, why did I not go with the 6400 versus the new 7th generation, 35 watts versus 65? I don't think, or at least I couldn't find a 7th generation at 35 watts. So you have both the Core i5 as well as the Core i3. And either of these can be used. I have an i3 in there because it's a little lower cost than the i5, but not much. So you get obviously better performance using the i5. So I may try this with the i5. And again, this one is also 3500 or 35 watts. So these were the case I used earlier. Like I said, $45.95 versus $39 or $49 if you order the US version. It came in 3 or 4 days from Geek, and I'll have a link in a moment to that. I then ordered this eData 256 gig NAND, so it provides speedy performance. Now this case does also support, has a place on the bottom for two SD card, what do you want to call them? SATA drives, SSD. But again, anything that you add to not only to the case adds both weight, but also consumes power. So I found that this was great for my needs. You can actually get a larger version, 200 or 512, or even higher, or you could split it up if you want to. And then you don't need this anymore unless you're going to use this case. I use this flexible cable card in order to put the GPU on top of the case. With this Geek case, you don't need that. And then I went with a MSI Skylake, this particular version here, because it also supported and provided the Wi-Fi built into it. Some of the others that I tried might be a little less, but then you have to go out and buy a $30 M2 Wi-Fi card. And this one has it already in it with the antennas. So that's the reason I went with that. This power supply here is necessary if you want to drive this thing. I found, notice it says 180 watts. You could probably get by with a 150 watt power supply, but definitely a 120 watt system did not work for me, which was a 10 amp system. It did not work. So you need about 12 amps to drive this system. So keep that in mind. But plus $18.99 for a power supply is pretty good. You just need to get yourself and make your own coax cable to support this. And then I have a little 40 millimeter fan to cool the power supply. And then you have to get this card, or this intelligent DC-DC PCU or PSU. Here you can get it at 7450, or you can get them used. I got a couple used at $29. Keep in mind though, there's a reason that these were used at $29.99. They don't supply all the cables, so you'll have to go to, and I'll provide a link in the show notes for the company who makes this. And they also do custom power supplies, but this is not a bad price considering that most of them run about $30 to $50. But again, remember, this is only a DC to DC. This won't be useful to you unless you either buy a battery or you go up here and buy this power supply. All right, and then the other thing that I had to buy was this 20 pin to 8 or 24. I don't know yet if I need it. As you can see, the cost is not that dramatic. And then a 16 gigabyte chip for 117. You could probably get by with 8 gigabytes or even less, which is even less. So if you need to be really on a budget. And then some of these other cards, here's a 6100. So you can get a tray version of it at $109. And then I went with this fan here. Again, you could probably go with another type of fan. I used this one because I wanted to keep my case slim, but now that the case is a little taller, that's not a problem. The Sandpiper Deluxe shoulder, and then this high density HDP plastic sheet, and then these D-rings. And that's all you need. And worked out. Actually, I need some screws and so forth to bolt it all together. So what did I come out with total price? I think about $700-800, depending on, you know, what type of processor you want to work with, memory, and how much SSD space you want to provide to it. So there you go. I will probably have this thing all wired up, and I'll shoot some video of me actually working with it with the HTC Vive. I have verified that the i3 does seem to work with it. Also, you know, it's not listed here. Sorry about that. Here it is. Almost forgot about it. Is the 1050 low profile. Now you could probably go with a Radeon low profile card too. I think they have one that's also compatible. Reason I went with this, it's one of the lower wattage. This is 75 watts. And trust me, that is the average. That's not your peak. So add 10 to 20% peak on top of these. So this really is like 85, 90 watt peak, and about 40 watts peak for the CPU. So that's the reason why what you would think 75 plus 35 plus the board itself consumes, I think, 10 watts. You could get by with a 10 amp power supply, but that was not the case. 12 amps minimum. And obviously with this power supply here, you can get 15 amps. So that's more than adequate. Now keep in mind, these are all, what do you want to call them? Desktop type components. So performance is pretty good. The i3 and this GPU is at the bare minimum. Like I said, I was able to run most of my HTC Vive stuff. Some of it seemed a little lower quality, but for the most part, I couldn't tell the difference. The fact is that I was able to walk around with a previous version of this on my back within the confines of my room area. It was kind of cool without cables. Now, with that being said, if you've got an HTC Vive, and we've covered it already, there is a wireless solution that was only $300. So it's up to you, $300 in your desktop, or do you want to build yourself a backpack? I think the backpack will be a nicer, especially with the mixed reality system from Microsoft, because this is more than adequate, provides enough performance, and the fact is that it's inside out tracking that gives you much better range in the ideal situation, like a warehouse with obviously proper objects or patterns on the wall to provide it tracking capability. This thing might be the better buy. I will be testing that over the next week or two as well. So here's some more. Here's the Geek website, and they have several cases, and they all seem very reasonably priced, but this is the one that I chose. They did have an A20, which I hope they still had. It's a little shorter, about by a half an inch, but as you can see, it seems to fit pretty well. In fact, it didn't even cover my entire back. Fits kind of in the small of my back and still provided room. This is where the fan is. Let me there we go. So it's a nice little case, very lightweight. And then here they talk about the power supply that can go in it. So you could go with a standard power supply, or you can go with some of these 19-volt power supplies, which is somewhat misleading because most of those 19 volts can actually run down to 14, 12 volts. So you could go with that. I chose the one that I did, and I'll talk about that in just a second, is because I wanted the ability not only to be running from battery, but I wanted to be able to shut off when the battery got too low, and this particular power supply gave me that capability. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. And then, as you mentioned, or as I mentioned, the 2 SSDs below it. So there you go. So the other thing is maybe hold off and wait to the 8th generation. Supposedly they will have a 15-watt chip. Now, I don't know if that's specifically OEM for laptops, but if that's not the case, even some of these other processors like this Core i5, I think has 4 cores, and then also will support 4 cores with 8 threads. But I do believe these are 65 watt, and seeing the 60s Ts are your lower wattage. So if I look at this here, what is my wattage? Did I miss it? Too much data. I'm pretty sure, yeah, here we go. Oh, great. So TDP is 15 watts. Configure TDP up is 25. So maybe you just want to hold off. I know that these need newer motherboards, so you'll have to hold off on that as well, but I will report back. I'm waiting for this. As you can see, it consumes on the upper end 25, but standard average is 15. That will knock 20 watts off of that. So you could probably power this with a 10 watt or 10 amp 12 volt system. More importantly, you'll get more longevity out of your battery, and also supports 4 cores with 8 threads versus the i3, which only has 2 cores, no threads, and the i5 I think has 2 cores with 2 threads, so, or 4 threads altogether. So this seems to be the perfect option. We'll see when it comes, but let's see, launch date is Q3 17, so it should be coming out soon. Looking forward to that. All right, so I'm going to jump back to my screen here for a moment while I find my last item. Okay, so here's the power supplies, and this is a great company, and I've talked to them. So if you're looking at creating a very small compact system, they've got a lot of these nice small power supplies. This one supports the 24-pin ATX directly. And you just plug it in, and it has the adapters here, as you can see, to support. This is what I was using earlier. The sad thing, it only supports 12 volts, or small plus or minus, but anything above it, like 14, will not operate it. So I went with, they have another version. Let's see if I can find it. Is it this one here? This one here, it's a 20 pin as well, but again, we'll test to see if this one works. This one is 120 watts, which, as mentioned, may or may not support this. I don't think it will, but this has a range of 12 to 25 volts. So if you're only trying to create something that doesn't require an external GPU, that might be something if you want to drive it. But what I went with is this little power supply here. Where's it at? The now I can't find it. It was 160 watts. Darn, and I need to find it. Okay, so there's a 200. We don't want AC, we want DC. Here. Well, this is their newer model here. It's actually a 200 watt, and this supports so much wattage in, and also has a USB output. It is not the one that I have, and I don't know why I can't find the one that I have. Well, that's not good. They must have stopped making it. Well, I should have been better prepared. I apologize for that. well, let's enlarge this one because it's similar. So the important thing, now, let's do this. Let's go back to we'll call it up here. So this is the one that I used. Some of the points to keep in mind, let's see if we can bring this up, is it only supports the 20 pin, but you can get a 20 pin adapter. It is kind of weird. You'd have to get it custom because this is if I remember correctly, a male, so that it can be gone, or it was a male to male. They don't make them male. It's a 24 pin male or 20 pin to 24 pin male. So I had to go to 24 to male to a male to female, 20 pin to a male. So it's a little convoluted. If you're good at making cables, I would recommend that. It also has a 12 volt connector here, so that most motherboards support that feature as well. And then it has on the left here, some spade lugs so that you can run your 12 volt or whatever power DC into it. And then you have some standard kind of motherboard type connectors. I can't remember the name of the connector now, but what you can do is run your power switch to the board, which then controls the board, and then it sends a signal back out to your board. And the purpose of that is to shut down your system if it goes lower than a lower voltage. So it does a soft shutdown. There's also another sensor in here so that you can then feed it to your board to identify certain power levels. And then there's also little links in here that allow you to little dip switches in here to set up the voltage that this thing will shut down at. So it's a nice little box. Like I said, it's at $79. However, if you think that this might be a better choice for you, you might want to go with this one. It's the same kind of thing. It also has a USB interface, so that, and plus a little piece of what do you want to call it? Software that allows you to put it on your Windows machine. That allows you to. Sorry about that. I'm distracted. I have an old cat, which I've mentioned before, who has found a little place to kind of hang out in here, and I have ruined his jumping off point. Sadly, my wife and I just can't terminate his life. He's still doing fairly well, but he sure can be an irritant. Oh well, so let's move on. So you can try out this one, look at it. I will give you a report back next week on this power supply. This is a fairly new power supply. It's 200 watts. The other thing is I didn't have this case in mind, so I wanted something a little smaller. Now that this case could support something like this, you might want to look into it. There is one fine point to keep in mind. This only supports a certain voltage out and 12 volt out, where the one that I was using, the 160, supports all the voltages that go directly to your motherboard. So keep that in mind too. This one, you would have to buy a PT or a Pico PSU along with it, and so that may not be what you want to do. And again, it was just here last week, so I don't know what happened to it. Maybe they phased it out. Oh well, so if I find it, I'll make sure that the link is in the show notes. It provides a PDF of all the connectors as well as the jumpers so that you can set it up properly. I'll probably take a snapshot of my board to let you know what worked for me. Okay, so that about wraps it up. I will bring up my little case again. Pretty pleased with it, and I'll send some pictures out later in the week of me actually wearing it. So I mounted it directly to the panel, but you could probably make a quick mount system so that if you wanted to set it up as a desktop. But I found that it works pretty well. Also, I have a hook here so you can hang it. You know, you could have a hanging computer if you wanted to. Oh well. So there you go. Pretty excited to get this done and try it out next week. So on that note, I think that's about it. I appreciate you joining me. I hope you like the new time. I noticed we had a couple of people in, and if not, just send me a note on why you don't. If you like it, I'm going to continue with it. I just found that most people, you can't please everybody on the East Coast and the West Coast. Some people have time on the weekend. but as you know, this gets live and then updated and set up on YouTube after we're done. So you can always view it later. And as mentioned, I have all the things that I've talked about in the show notes with links. So if you've noticed, the last few weeks, Chris has not been with us. So sadly, Chris's schedule seems to be a little bit off. I'll just leave it at that. And I felt that, we can probably join each other on monthly. He wasn't able to join us at the beginning of the month, which is what I was hoping he would be able to do. So what I'm planning to do in the future is have guests. If you're a regular and feel like you have something to contribute and want to be a guest host, I'd appreciate it. An email. Love to have you on, and you can be part of it. The other thing is, if you've got a product or something, or know somebody with a product that would like to be interviewed, I would be happy to have them on. I will have to say, I can be kind of a scrutinizer when it comes to your products and your designs and so forth. So be prepared for that. But again, love to have you on. Love to have some people that you might want to recommend and suggest. And I don't normally push it, but like me, I'm probably going to push this back out as podcast as well. It makes it somewhat difficult since I show off a lot of stuff, but hopefully my verbal descriptions are adequate that you could listen to as well. As you know, I don't monetize on this. It's basically for my enjoyment and hopefully to bestow and provide more information to the audience. So just leave it at that, which is I find frustrating that I have so many copy or people when I use some of the material, including advertisements, who say I am violating copyright, but a lot of that spots. So I always have to go back and argue it. And that's always a pain. Oh, well, enough ranting on my part. You've got something else to do with your weekend besides listen to me. So on that note, I say goodbye, and I will see you next Saturday on All Things 3D, 3D in Review. Bye.